here's what we're going to be looking at. Discover these tips. These are the 4 bullet points we've got. Find and access the 25th anniversary presets. So there are specific presets that are part of this bundle. Again, we're going to be looking at 5 of those specifically. We're going to take a look at examples of what each of these presets can do to enhance urban and street photography. So again, I've got a selection of photos. We're going to start with each one of those 5 presets, and then we're going to customize those presets. I'm going to show you the different things we can do to customize, how I personally use presets as a starting point, but it's almost never an ending point. We're going to then create our own presets from those, and I'm going to show you a neat little tip that I'm pretty sure that not everybody out there watching knows about when it comes to saving presets. So we'll have a little bit of fun with that. All right, we will go back and forth between the live presentation and the Q&As. I will be keeping an eye on a list of questions that are being curated and handed off to me, and I will address those as we go. So camera off, and let me make sure I've got my Q&A on since I had to close everything up. There we go, and let's do this. All right, first photo. This is definitely going to fall into that urban category. This is, in my mind again, this is just a bicycle against a street lamp, but there was something about it's called the juxtaposition of the shadow against the bright spot here, the sun on the street. And when I saw this scene, I remember this. I remember that when I shot this, I had my camera set to black and white, kind of a high contrast black and white mode. So looking through the viewfinder, I saw this scene in black and white, and it was beautiful. And here's the funny thing. You'll notice up here in the corner, in fact, I'm going to take the exposure up a little bit. Let's go for the regular exposure slider, take that up a little bit. You'll notice up here behind the bicycle is a guy holding a camera with a big Atmos shield on it. This was shot in New Orleans. I was actually on a shoot when I shot this. That was my producer who's holding my camera. It's kind of a funny thing, but I didn't see him because the view through the viewfinder was so high contrast. As you can see, I was in the bright sun here. I just didn't see him there. So when I looked at the picture later, and I'm like, oh, for crying out loud, Gary's in the photo. We need to fix that. And so that's part of what's going to happen here in Photolab. In Silver Efex Pro. So let's get started with this. I'm going to pull the highlights back just a little bit. You can see it's not blown out, but there's a bit of a flatness here. It could just be smooth street, but I'm going to pull the highlights down just a touch on this before I send it off to Silver Efex Pro. And I always advise looking at your histogram closely before you send it off to the plugin, because remember, you're going to be rendering out a TIFF file, and I just want to make sure I'm not clipping any shadows or highlights before I do that. So that's enough. I just wanted to pull that back a little bit. Click on the Nik Collection button, click on Silver Efex Pro 2. Oh, and just in case you haven't seen this yet, before we go there, if I click on the settings button here, you do have options in here, what format you want to send the file to the Nik Collection in. You can do it as a JPEG, which honestly, I'm not quite sure why you would ever do that, but you could. Generally, you're always going to want to go as a TIFF file because that's going to give you the most flexibility. There's also this export selected files without processing option. However, because this is a raw file, it wouldn't actually work if I selected that. You would do this if you wanted to continue editing a photo, not duplicate a new version of it. So we're going to leave it as a TIFF. You can do 8 or 16-bit. I basically always do 16-bit, just have that extra headroom in there. And nothing else we need to change, although this is an interesting thing that I don't know if we've talked about in one of these webinars before. As we've talked about the watermark feature that's in DxO Photolab right now, there's this option that we see in the standard export module where you can override the watermark preset. This is not by default enabled, but I have turned this on in mine so that I don't accidentally export an image with a watermark to the Nik Collection, because I don't want to have that watermark burned in. So I enable override, and then I set this to no watermark. That way, if I have a watermark applied, it doesn't get rendered into that when it gets sent off. All right, click OK. It's going to render off that TIFF file and bring us into the Nik Collection Silver Efex Pro, which incidentally is still my favorite plugin ever. I guess we actually have to click the button. There we go. My favorite plugin in the collection. I just absolutely adore black and white work, adore Silver Efex Pro. All right, here we go. Let's go big on this thing. And start off by looking for the presets. You have your preset library up here in the top left corner. If I click on the All button, we see all of the presets in here. But the new ones we're looking for are right here under 25th anniversary, just a little subcategory, if you will. And you'll see that there are a series of portrait presets here in Silver Efex Pro. We keep scrolling down. Then we see the street ones. Dramatic, gritty, high contrast, hint of blue, and old vintage. And let me just click through them real quick just to kind of get a preview of what these look like. And then we're going to come back and visit each one individually, each one with a different photo. So you have this one called Old Vintage, kind of a yellowed, faded, slightly sepia, de-vignetted around the edges look. This hint of blue, which is very, very minimal processing, if any processing. Yeah, it's just very minimal processing with this blue cast over it. There's a high contrast one, which is pretty self-explanatory, high contrast in there. There's gritty, which adds quite a bit of green to the image. It's always kind of fun. And then there is dramatic, dramatic, which is where we're going to start. So the dramatic one is similarly to high contrast. It is very high contrast. It's even more high contrast. And just by applying that dramatic preset, we've already basically lost the fellow in the background. And Gary's gone. Sorry, buddy. But Gary has been mostly eliminated. I can further darken that just to make sure. But at this point, I've got that very similar to what I saw through the camera, this very high contrast image. And now I'm really seeing what it was I loved about this image. The white on the wheel on here, the reflection around the spokes, and how that's making that kind of glow almost really pop against the dark shadow in the background there. And then again, of course, with that bright street in the foreground. So overall, I think it looks really, really cool. So let's see what we can do to make it even better. I'm going to go up here and just take a look at what has been applied in here. And you can see the brightness has been adjusted. So the midtones have been brought up a little bit. Dynamic brightness has been brought down. There's a little bit of contrast work done in here. And we can just scroll through here and see what has been applied. And this is really why I love using presets, because you click on a preset and you go, okay, I like this aspect of it. I click on this one and go, oh, I like that aspect of that one. But I don't necessarily know how it got there. How did whoever made the preset get there? And the ability to just go through these sliders and figure out what went into making that preset and then adopting that into your own is really the key. That's just one of the really cool things about presets. That and inspiration, just trying, maybe I didn't know what I wanted to do with this image. I just kind of click through and try a bunch of different presets. And, maybe I come to this one and I go, oh, it's kind of heading in the right direction. I like where that's going, but it's not quite there. And then I find one that's really close to what I want. And I go, yeah, that's what I want to do. Okay, so let's finish this image. The shadows are quite dark in there. I want to make them even darker. So I'm going to go to my brightness up here, go to my shadows, and just darken my shadows. So you have this separation, right? If I take the whole brightness slider, the whole image gets brighter or darker in there. But when you open this up, and if you hadn't seen this, you'll notice next to each one of these brightness, contrast, and structure, there's a little triangle that then expands out to give you more control. And I can say, just make my highlights brighter or darker. Make just my midtones brighter or darker. Or in this case, I want to take my shadows and make them darker. And it's quite good. You can see the shadows in there in the background just dropping off into pure black, which is really what I wanted in there. Maybe I want to, let's see here, maybe take the contrast, the amplify whites, and bring that up a little bit, make the whites pop a little bit more. And that's really helping the edge of the wheel, that rim of light around the outside of the wheel, the white wall on the wheel itself, the spokes. It's just making them all pop a little bit more by amplifying those whites. And I got to be careful. I get it too high in there, we're going to start to see some of this background stuff coming through. You actually see the logo of the camera starting to show up on there. So maybe what I'll do to compensate for that is use a control point. And the control points are where all the power is in here. I'm just going to drop a control point on here, make that super dark in the background, and now that background's gone. I'm not even being careful with the control point. Just throw it on there, darken that background, and call it a day. It looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. Maybe I'll add a little bit of grain as a final touch. I do tend to like a little grain on my black and white photos. So let's go down here to finishing adjustment. Oops, sorry, I lied. To film types. Here we go. Here's grain. We can see that the grain per pixel is on a little bit. Now here's an interesting thing. If you've never played with the grain before, if you take the slider all the way up, that's actually no grain. It's the opposite of what you might think, but it makes sense if you read the description. Grain per pixel. How many grains of grain, how many grains of grain are there per pixel? At 500, we are basically saying no visible grain. If I take it all the way down to 1, there is no 0. It's 1 is the lowest setting. Now every single pixel is effectively a piece of grain. You should always do your grain adjustments at 100% so you can see clearly what's happening in here. And at this point, you know, it's totally overdone, right? That's way too much grain. So I'll just find a happy medium point in here, give myself just a little bit of grain texture, but nothing too crazy. And yeah, I like that. I think that's pretty good. We're gonna call it a day. I dig it. I'm gonna hit save on that. And let's take a quick look over at the questions that have already started popping up and see if I can address those. All right. Is there an advantage to shooting HDR for the purpose of having better black and white rendering? Oh, fantastic question. Okay, so to clarify, I feel like I'm out of focus here. To clarify, you're not shooting in HDR. You would be shooting multiple exposures to combine into an HDR, a high dynamic range final image. And absolutely doing black and white with high dynamic range compositing, combining multiple exposures, totally a cool thing to do. If you have a scene that has too much dynamic range, the darkest shadows, the brightest highlights are too far apart for your camera sensor to capture all in one exposure, by all means, bracket the shot, blend it into an HDR image, and then do your black and white conversion from there. Totally valid thing to do. I would say it's not something I've really done very much. To me, when I'm not really into HDR that much. I don't do that much of it. But usually when I do, it is more about the color. But I have played with it, and it is absolutely something that you can do. Great question. Thank you. Next question. I noticed you exported the image into Silver Efex Pro at 72 dpi. Would you change this to 300 if you're intending to print the image? No. And here's why. That number on there is essentially irrelevant. You're not actually changing the number of pixels. Let's make the math really easy. Let's say that your base file, your photo is 1,000 by 1,000 pixels. If you put into the DPI, or PPI, pixels per inch or dots per inch, and it's really PPI at this point. If you put in 100 PPI and then you hit print, you would have a 10 by 10 inch image. If you put in, did I do that right? Did I say 1,000, 1,000 and 100? Yeah, that's right. Make sure I get my simple math right. I try to make it simple and then I confuse myself. So if you had 1,000 pixels, you put it at 100 pixels per inch, then you would have a 10 inch by 10 inch image. If you put 10 pixels per inch, then you'd have a 100 by 100 inch image. But regardless, it's still only 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. It only matters when you hit print. By the time you hit print, then you can change things. You can change your print size, how many inches is it going to be. And if you're going to go through a kind of a more advanced print module, then you would have all kinds of control over that. It just doesn't matter at this stage. And I think for most people who are printing, they're not printing at home. Clearly, you can buy a nice printer at home and that's great. But I know, at least personally, I don't even bother with a printer at home. Whenever I want to print, I send it off to a lab. And at that point, they are going to optimize the image. It does not matter what you send them as far as how many pixels per inch are included in there. Next question. If we blow the highlights when adding a contrasty black and white preset, how do we retain details like the bike spokes without adding drama? We blow the highlights, how do you do it without adding drama? Okay, so drama is, let's consider this first. Drama is not a slider setting, right? Drama, we associate high contrast with drama. So if we have a dramatic scene, we would reverse that. If we see a high contrast scene, we would think of that as dramatic. If we see a low contrast scene, we would not see that as dramatic. It'd be, what's the anti of dramatic? But it wouldn't be considered as dramatic. If you've blown your highlights, then something like the street itself, let's say the surface of the street was blown out and it was, there was no texture detail left in there, that would be blown out. And then you would probably want to go in there and pull highlights back, do some highlight recovery, or maybe use one of the control points to really pull that back into range so that you see that texture. Something like the spokes, however, is just pure white. It's a specular highlight. And so you don't need to think about the detail in there because there isn't any detail in there. It was just pure bright highlight. And so there's nothing to recover. So as long as you see the spoke against the background, and it's going to be like almost a pure black to white in this case, then you're fine. You're good to go. I would only worry about it if there's texture that you've lost, like in the street. Like if I had made it so the street was just a big white chunk instead of being that textured gray, that's when I would worry about that. Okay, let's move on to the next photo. Turn the camera back off. And the next photo is this one here. So this one to me would be more a street photography type of shot. I shot this in India last year, or a couple of years ago, I guess. This is on a bus or train. I guess this is a bus. And we've got this vendor who's kind of standing there and you know, waiting to jump off the bus. And he's a street vendor. It's cool. He's got his things that he's selling. And I did a long exposure, slightly long exposure. Let's see, what was this? 30th of a second exposure here, a little bit of shutter dragging to get that motion in the background. And this is cool. Now this has very much an old world feel to it. Let's just go ahead and take this right into Silver Efex Pro. Because of the location, because there's nothing in this photo that screams modern. Even the bus itself is quite old. There's nothing about it that screams modern. I feel like with this photo, I can get away with doing a kind of old style. We're gonna go for this old vintage sepia style look on it, and it's gonna totally work for this photo. It just works. You know, this is the kind of thing that if you apply this look to a picture of a guy holding his cell phone, it's probably not gonna fly. You're not gonna feel like it's a vintage image. But here, you know, the most modern thing about this scene is probably his leather belt. It's really has this very nice look to it, content of it that really kind of lends itself to this vintage look. So this is what we're gonna start with. All right, so old vintage to begin with. Again, looking through the sliders to see what's going on in here, you can see the brightness and the contrast that's been applied in this. And this is feeling a little bit flat to me. I want to increase the contrast a little bit on here. Just remember, we can always go over here and check the histogram. Here we go. Let's click on histogram here. We can look at the histogram and see where that is. And I can see that my black levels are empty. There's nothing down in pure black. So I definitely have some room to work with in here. So I'm going to play with the contrast, but I'm going to play specifically with the amplified blacks. So let's actually start with just generic contrast overall. If I bring this up, the brights get brighter, the darks get darker. It's definitely a higher contrast, but this doesn't really feel good to me. I don't like that, so I'm going to undo that. I just want to increase the contrast in the black. So I'm going to take this amplified black slider and take that up, and it starts to add some darkness into those blacks in there, into those darker shadows, without going super, super dark. It just adds a little bit in there, adds a little bit of extra texture, a little bit extra contrast, and I dig that. I think that looks pretty good. I might even want to go in, let's see here, do I want to take the shadows down even more, just to darken them a little bit more? I don't know, probably not. I think it's, no, that's fine. I think I like it the way it is there. Okay, so we'll leave that to start. Then let's take a look at the left-hand side of the picture here. It's a little bit distracting how bright it is inside of the bus on here. So I'm going to do a little dodging and burning. There's a lot of different ways we can go about this. I can use control points, which is going to give me the most control. But in this case, it's really the whole left-hand side of the image that I want to be darker. So I'm going to utilize down here under finishing this tool called burn edges. And burn edges, you can turn on for all edges at once. And so you can see it's essentially a vignette, but it's a square-edged vignette. Or you can take manual control and do this one edge at a time. And so I can control the left edge, the top, the right, and the bottom. In this case, it's the left edge that I want. I'm going to take the strength up, and you'll see by default, it's a very thin band. Let me crank it all the way up. It's a very thin band of darkness on here, but I can change the size of that, make it quite big. I can change the transition, how smoothly or how long it takes to transition from the darkest dark off to no effect at all. So now I have this big, huge gradient on there, if you will, to make it even a little bit bigger. It's obviously completely overdone, but I did this with the strength all the way up so I could see what was happening. And now I'll take that strength slider down and find a position that does what I want it to do. Maybe I'll pull the size of that back just a little bit as well. So now we see that darkened edge. I can turn off the finishing adjustments here to turn off all the finishing adjustments, but that's also going to turn off the toning. So it's a little bit harder to see exactly what's happening there with just the strength. So just the strength of the burn edges. So what I'll do is I'll take the strength down to 0, and I'll just, remember where this was. Is at 33%. So I'll take that down. Go, yeah, that's good. That's actually a good amount in there. Maybe play with it a little bit. No, I think it's actually pretty good right there. So there we go. So we've got that added to it. Cool. All right, so I've taken that edge down a little bit. His face is getting a bit lost in here. I feel like I want to brighten his face a little bit. So I'm going to pop a little bit of sunlight, a little bit of light right onto his face in here. And I'm going to do that using the control point. So let's add a control point onto his face, make it pretty small, and just brighten it up just a little bit. Not much. If I go too much, it's going to be really obvious and really bad. I just want to add just a little kiss of light into there, just to make his face pop a little bit more against that background. And I think using control points to brighten up a face is a pretty common thing to want to do that works out pretty well. Let's see here. All right, let's step back again, take a look at this. the overall toning, the sepia look, I dig it for this photo, but I'm feeling it's a little bit too strong, a little too much. So let's go down to the toning slider. Let's open this up and see what's going on in here. I have a ton of controls over toning, different color tones that you can add to it. I'm going to leave the tone that's in there, but I'm just going to take the strength down a little bit. I don't want to go completely down. I don't want it to be totally black and white. I want it to have a little bit of that sepia-ish look. I just don't want it to be too overwhelming. So let's say, I think right about there. That works pretty good. All right, working pretty good. Yeah, I like it. I think we're good. I think I'm done. I'm going to call that one done. I'm going to hit save, and we're going to finish that photo. All right. Before going to the next photo, I see we've got more questions coming up, so let me hit those. If after viewing the presets and you don't wish to choose any, how do you get back to your original photo? Wonderful question. Let me, let's see, which is my next photo? Okay, I'm going to, well, I'll just go back to the same photo. Where'd my mouse go? Hello, mouse, there we go. Let's go back to the same photo. This one is, there's that black and white. Okay, let's start over. Let me jump into the filter again. Oop, use unique names. Do not overwrite my image that I just did. And let me show you how to do that, because there's no reset button inside of the plugins. So basically what you need to do is apply a preset that is a starting point. So let's say I apply this preset, or I applied a dozen presets. I tried different ones, and I just want to start over again. Go to your all presets, and the very first one is called neutral. When you apply neutral, that is resetting everything. If you look at all your sliders in here, everything is set back to normal. And if you're ever unsure if you're back to normal or not, click and hold the compare button. As you hold the compare button down, if nothing changes, then you know that you are looking at the original image. So if I add, say, this preset, and then I do the compare, as I toggle back and forth, it shows me the original, go to neutral, and this is now nothing applied to it. I think it might be confusing for some folks who are not used to Silver Efex Pro that when you click the compare button, you don't see the color image. I mean, this was a color photo. Why am I not seeing it in color? Because in Silver Efex Pro, its baseline is a very generic black and white conversion. Let's just call it a complete desaturation with no additional contrast or anything applied. But if you're trying to compare the tones of your image as you've adjusted it to the original black and white, then this is what you want to see. You want to see it without any added stuff to it, but you do want to see it in black and white. So that's what that is. It's a great question. Thank you. Why, when we save a photo edited with Silver Efex Pro in Photoshop, two layers are created, one Silver Efex Pro and another Nik Collection? I think you're probably referring to smart objects, and it's not actually two layers. There's a container for the smart object and then the filter itself. And if you were to add another filter to that smart object, it would be inside of that same container. I think that's what you're probably referring to, unless it's just the original image, but I don't think that's what it was. So for two layers, one Silver Efex, one. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what you're seeing. If that's not what you're seeing, try and clarify the question for me, but I'm pretty sure that's what you're seeing in there. Okay, let's move back on. Alrighty, so let me cancel this. And next photo is, this is the staged one that I was referring to earlier. So here we go, photo load, there it is. All right, this is, this was a shoot. This was actually for an event that I was teaching at in New York at Adorama Photo a couple years ago, Adorama Camera a couple years ago. This is a professional BMX rider. His name is Chad Douglas, and we hired him to ride in the street so that we could shoot him. And I was, teaching photography around it. And so this is staged street photography, if you will, staged urban photography. But cool, it's still a cool image. So however you got there, it is what it is. All right, so let's treat this one. Let's see, I'm gonna look at my histogram. Looks like I'm close to clipping my highlights, so I am gonna pull my highlights down just a little bit just to make sure I don't lose any texture in there. And that's good enough. That's all I wanna do, make sure I got all my details, and let's open this up in Silver Efex Pro. All right, firing up. Here we go, and I'm going to start this one with the presets. Go back to my 25th anniversary ones. Scroll down, gritty, because gritty just looks cool as it is. I love the grain, I love the texture on here, but man, there's some cool stuff we can do to this image. So again, as a starting point, I think it's great, but there's more that we can do. There's more that I want to do to this. First thing I want to do is play with the grain, maybe add a little bit more to it. Now, I said in the beginning that you always want to do your grain at 100%, zoom in at 100%. But what if you want to look at the whole image while you're adjusting the grain, but still keep an eye on his face? Okay, well, or any portion of it. You have down here under the loop and histogram, if we switch this over to loop, you have the ability to look at any portion of your image at 100%. You just scroll this around and there you see it. But as soon as I move my mouse off of it, this changes. Well, there's this little pin on here, this little push pin. You grab that pin and then you hover it over wherever you want. So let's say right about there, and I click on the screen, click on the picture, and it locks that in. That is now pinned into place. And I can even drag this around in the window here if I want to reposition it. So now I'm able to keep a close eye on a portion of the scene at 100% while continuing to adjust the grain or whatever I want to do while looking at the whole image. So let's go down to the grain slider here. Our default, our starting point, I should say, was 195. And so just to kind of reiterate what I talked about earlier, if I take this all the way up to 500, we lose all grain. You can see it's very, very clean in there. If I take that all the way down, it's just pure grain. This is actually a really good place to look at this. Grain all the way down at 1, zoomed out, you can totally still see what the image is, right? But look at when we look at it 100%, I mean, his face is almost gone, right? It is so much grain. There's so much grain on here that the face is almost completely gone. And so you might look at this and go, oh, maybe I don't want to make it that grainy because it's just not going to look that good as a final image. So let's maybe bring that up a little bit. So just one of those points, being able to look at a portion of your scene at 100% while looking at the whole thing zoomed out or zoomed in. I mean, you could change your zoom ratio in here as well if you wanted to look at it, you know, I don't know, even more. If you wanted to like zoom in super far zoom in on here, but then look at your image at 100% down here, you have that capability. So kind of a neat thing to be able to do in there. Okay, so grain, I'm good with that. I think the grain looks pretty good on there. Let's see if I can make his face stand out a little bit more. He's definitely not blending into the background, but it is a little bit lower contrast around his face. I want to make his face pop just a little bit more. Now, I don't want to brighten his face because that wouldn't really make sense on here, but because, and especially since he's already dark skinned, maybe if I lighten the background, maybe that will give me that separation, that little bit of additional separation. So let's try it. I'm going to do that using control points. So I'm going to grab a control point and I'll just drop it onto the background here, and let's see if it's going to be easy. I'll just drop it, change the brightness, and no, it's brightening up everything there because the tonal values of his face and the background here are too similar. So they're really getting caught up in that same mask. And at any time, if you want to see what your mask looks like, click on the mask icon here. And we can see there right very clearly, it is affecting the background there as well as his face. And if I move this around, down here, it's a bit better. It's definitely got more of the background here than his face, but I think we're going to have to do a little bit of fancy control point work to really minimize this. So I don't want to affect his face at all. I do want to affect the background, and I want to affect both this part of the background and that part of the background. So let's start by getting both of the pieces of the background in. Let me make this a little bit smaller. It's really just behind his face that I'm worried about. And now I'm going to hold down the Option key and drag this control point, which has made a second control point where the mask is currently visible as well. So the checkbox is on both of these. So the mask is currently visible on both. So this has now selected both ranges of that background in there, but his face is super selected. So we don't want that. So now I'm going to add another control point. And this time, instead of option dragging it up, honestly, it doesn't matter how you do this. You can do it either way. I'm going to go back to control points, click on this button here so that I can create a new one and drop it onto his face. Now, what you're seeing right now, if you haven't seen this before, is you are seeing a combination of the masks where these two have their mask enabled and this one here has the mask disabled. And we see that over here. If I click on this checkbox, then that gets enabled as well. But what I'm trying to visualize here is what these two control points, number 1 and 2, what those will affect if control point 3 has nothing applied to it. And that's exactly what I'm seeing in here. So this control point is protecting his face from these. If I was to go in here and change the brightness on this one and this one and this one, it'd be the same as just doing it to the whole image. But by not adjusting anything on here, I'm effectively protecting his face from whatever I do to the background here. Now I can enhance this a little bit more. Let's go into 100% on here. And we can see that the front of his face, his nose is getting hit there. So I'm going to option drag this one down over his nose. Let's make this a little bit smaller. And I'm just trying to get his face protected in there. There we go, that's pretty good. And I'll do one more over the back of his head. And let's see how that works. Yeah, actually, that's working pretty good. So I've got his face very much protected. This part of the foreground is selected. And so now I'm going to adjust the brightness of these two and not touch these three. Now, because I want to do both of these the same amount, I'm going to select both of them and then go over here and click on the grouping button. That groups those two control points as one control. So now whatever I do, whether it's brightness, contrast, structure, amplify whites, blacks, and so on, that will affect both of those control points at once. So let's now hide all of the masks. And just to kind of drive this point home, I'll take the brightness and I'll take it like way up or way down. And we're seeing that it is affecting just that background there. There's almost no spillage onto his face. So now let's go ahead and zoom back out. Now I can go in here and decide, well, what do I want to do to that background? I said I wanted to brighten it up, and that's working pretty well. We definitely see him standing out against that more, but I could try going the other way. Should I darken it? Would that maybe be a better solution? No, it really isn't. I think that brightening it up a little bit is a good way to go about this. So you have incredible amount of control with the control points. Use them to enhance certain areas and use them to protect other areas. That's one of the keys to using control points, is protecting other areas, and that's exactly what I've done in here. All right, let's do something else that's kind of, well, actually, first I want to vignette this, and I'm going to do something I almost never do, but it's kind of fun for this image. Let's see, I want to add a little vignetting on here, so I'm going to go to my global vignette. There's presets in here. I can just kind of roll through these and see if any of the presets work, and actually, that one works out pretty well. I like that. Nice big vignette. Combined with that brightening of the center there, it really is making, drawing our focus to him on there. Kind of cool, kind of a good look. And then the thing that I kind of never do, but I'll just do it in here, is adding control point to the car to do a selective colorization. So let me grab, it's a yellow cab, right? It's a New York cab. So I'm going to drop a control point on the cab, go down here to SC, selective colorization, drag that up and reveal that yellow cab in there. Now I'm going to need a couple of control points for this. So I'm going to option drag this one over to the front of the car here. And let's see here, maybe make this one a little bit bigger. Let's do another one up here on the roof a little bit, drag that down a little. And yeah, we're starting to see that kind of come through. Now, let me make this a little bit bigger just to kind of fix something. If I make this too big, we're starting to see some yellow coming through here because it's just about the color. And if we go back and look at the original image, you'll see that there is yellow over here. It has nothing to do with the cab. It just happens to be a very warm light or something inside of this building. So we're seeing that show through here. I can solve that problem here by just making this control point smaller. But let's say that I couldn't. Just like I protected his face, I could go up here and grab another control point, drop that on that window on there, do nothing to it, and now I have protected that. I'm actually going to do that over this sign on here. That sign is red. We're not seeing the red come through, but just around this kind of blurry transition between the red and the white. If we look at it here, it's, you could argue that the tones are going slightly towards yellow in that transition. So I'm seeing a little bit of weird coloring in here. So I'm just going to grab another control point and just drop it on here just to make sure that none of this is getting colorized, because I don't want that to be colorized at all. There we go. Okay, so there's my final image. I dig it. It's kind of fun. Okay, so I created a different look by adding the vignette, enhancing the grain, and then of course doing all the control point work on him and on the car on here. I want to save this as a new variation of the preset that I started with. Remember, I started with a gritty on here. I want to save this so I can apply this to another photo, because you might have seen back in Photolab, I have another photo. Where is it? Here you go. I have another photo that has that shot in the same time that I want to apply this same look to. So I'm going to save this, go down here to custom, click on the plus, and I'm going to call this gritty V2, hit OK, and it now saves that preset. Now here's a trick that I'm going to wager a lot of people watching don't know. In this preset, it has saved it without the control points, because that makes sense, right? These control points are very specific to this image. So I probably don't want these control points applied to any other image. But if I did, I actually can save a preset with control points. And the way you do that is by holding down the Shift key while clicking on this plus button. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to, let's just say, for the sake of the demo here, that I want to create a preset with a saved selective color control point, but I don't want all the stuff over his face, because that doesn't make any sense for any other image. Okay, I'm going to hold down the Shift key and click on plus on here. I'm going to call this one gritty We'll call it gritty BMX, and I'm going to even call this one temp, because this one is not, this one's a temporary one. This is not the one I'm going to actually use and save. But if I now go in here and I reset this image, let's do a full reset, and let's get rid of the control points to do a full reset. Now, notice here when I clicked on the neutral, it did not remove the control points. So that's a little heads up there. It doesn't remove those by default. I'm going to go ahead and remove all these control points. There we go. So now we're back to our just total default image. I've got my original gritty preset that I can add to it, but now let's go to my custom ones. Here's the gritty that I had saved without control points, but I click on this one and now it adds those control points back in. So I can come back to this. Now I called this temp because I don't really want to save all these control points. So I'm just going to go in here and delete all of these. Delete, 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 delete. Let's even delete this one and this one and this one. I'm just going to save this one as a selective colorization, just as kind of a reminder when I load this up later that this is a that I have this control point in here for selective colorization. Now I'm going to hold down Shift, hit plus, and we're going to call this gritty with selective. I'll just abbreviate it with SC, selective colorization. Cool. So now I've got that one saved. That's the one that I'm actually going to reuse later. So now I'll go back to the one that I actually want to use for this image. Remember, that was my temp one. I can save it or I can delete it. Click the little X here. Let's go ahead and delete that preset. Don't care. And I'm going to apply this. Now I'm applying this to this image. Very unique look to that image. And there's that one. There we go. It draws up in a second. Now let's go to the second shot. Go back into Silver Efex Pro. Open this thing back up again. And I could choose to apply either the new version of the preset without any control points. So here we go. Apply that one. Or because I've got this one as kind of a reminder, oh, that's right, I got that selective colorization thing, I can apply that one. And there's the control point. Now there's not really any good color in this image for me to apply this to, but I've got this control point here ready to go if I wanted to. So I don't know, maybe I wanted to like bring the brick of the building back in or something like that. But it's just kind of a way to save those control points for usage later if you want to use them. So shift click on the plus button here and it saves the control points. There's no dialogue, there's nothing that tells you about it. It's just one of those hidden tricks that you have to know. But if you do that, that is what happens in there. Pretty slick. In this case, I don't actually want it. Let's get rid of that control point. I'll just go ahead and apply this. Alrighty. Let's see here. Any new questions? Yes, we have a couple new questions in here. Let's jump back over and take a look at the questions. Excuse me. All right, question. What is his camera gear? I guess that means me. Cameras and lenses. You're seeing a variety of shots in here. This shot, the street photographer here was a Lumix S1, I think. Yep, S1 with the 50mm f1.4 Lumix Pro lens. That's this series. The first photo, this one here, was shot on a GX85. So this is quite a few years old. When did I shoot this? This is like 2012. Where's the date? It's 2016. There we go. I guess it wasn't that long ago. Doesn't seem right. Was that only 2016? Anyway, that was shot on a GX85. Then with, oh, what lens was that? Doesn't say on here. Interesting. Why isn't that metadata there? I think that was the 15mm. Pretty sure that that's what I was shooting with. There was the 15mm Leica f1.7 lens, micro four thirds 15mm. So full frame equivalent would be a 30mm lens. Pretty sure. I don't know why that's not there. That's interesting. Huh, should be there. Then this photo, what was this shot with? Oh, GH5. That was shot with the GH5 and the 12-60 zoom lens. So the kit zoom lens, if you will. I mean, it's a great lens. It's a Leica lens, but it's the kit 12-60 f2.8 to f4 lens. So that's what that was shot with. Great, thank you. Can you tell a little bit about the zone system? Ooh, okay. The zone system I don't have time to get into today. However, I have done a complete video on the zone system. In fact, let me just take this opportunity to do this. Let me go, give me a second here. Let me pull up the web page. Okay, so we're going to my website and we're going to go to that DxO article, /DxO, or get DxO as the slide showed you, same one. And if you scroll down, you will see a list of all previous webinars that I've done. They're all on here. Ansel, here we go. Do it like Ansel. This one here, take your black and white to the next level. I really should add the word zone system into this. This one is all about the zone system. So watch that video. I spend the whole time discussing zone system, explaining the zone system from a theoretical point of view of what it is, and then how to use it in Silver Efex Pro. It's an amazing system. Once you understand it, very, very powerful. So I highly encourage you watching that video. So photojoseph.com/DxO, just do a find on the page for this one. Do it like Ansel, August 31st, 2019. All right, thank you. Great question. All right, oops, where am I? Bring that back, go away. Next question, I see a brush option. How to use this? The brush option has to do with Photoshop. It's a little bit of a legacy feature. Keep in mind that the Nik Collection has been around for 25 years, hence the 25-year anniversary. The brush option built a mask automatically in Photoshop and allowed you to then brush that back, brush the effect in or out against the original image. So that's how that worked. Today, the best way to do it is using a smart object, and then you have that mask built in. So it's kind of a legacy thing that doesn't really need to get used anymore, but that's what it's for. Next one, how to make control points bigger or smaller. Please explain what you do to resize control points. Okay, I will, let me look at my notes. Yes, the next image I'm gonna do control points again, so I will cover that when we get to it. Alrighty, let's turn off the camera. And next photo is this one. This photo here, this is from, there we go. This is shot in Thailand. This fellow with these incredible tattoos posed for me. And this was shot on since someone asked before, a Lumix GF1. This is an old photo. That's 2010. So that's a decade old. This was kind of a consumer level, maybe prosumer level micro four thirds camera with 20mm f1.7 lens. I really liked this camera. I sold it ages ago. That was a great camera. Anyway, yeah, let's do this one next. Okay. We're going to jump into Nik Collection, into Silver Efex Pro, and away we go. All right, for this one, I'm going to start with, see, there's my presets from before. I'm going to start with Hint of Blue, because there's something about this image. If we look at the original, it's got the blue on his hat. It feels a little bit color temperature cool. Because of that, it kind of inspired me to say, you know what, it's a little bit of a cool image. Let's go for the cool tones on here. Now, with this tonality right now, the cool tones, the most important thing to me is his chest, the tattoo, and it's kind of getting lost. The shirt is too bright, the hat is too bright, his skin is darker, so we need to enhance this. So that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to do this with control points, of course. So once again, you can scroll through and see what's been done to this, but where I care about, oh, and by the way, here's where that toning is coming in, this kind of blue toning. You can see the strength on there if you want to make that more or less. But we're going to leave it right where it was, oops, at 40. And let's work on the tattoo. All right, control points. So just to recap this, because I didn't really go over this in the beginning, with control points, what you're effectively doing with a control point is creating a mask based off of the color and tonality of the area that you've clicked on. So if I view the mask, you can see what this looks like here. And as I drag it around, as I cover, his skin right there, we're seeing just the skin selected, and the tattoo is not selected. So that whatever's black is not selected, whatever's white is selected, and any shade of gray in between is, a transition, a level of selection, if you will. If I position this, let me go to 100%. Well, this is a pretty low resolution image. Let's go to 200%. If I position this on the ink of the tattoo, you'll see that kind of reverses because we are now selecting just the tattoo, and it'd be easier to do this on a larger area. So let's say right about there, or maybe here. We're trying to find a big spot of it to select from. So we're selecting just that part of the image. So it's very helpful to turn on the mask view and then drag this around to select the portion of the image that you want to control. Now, this is, so let's get that on his skin, right about there. Okay, so this is selecting his skin, and it's selecting it within that ring. But you'll notice that ring is not a hard edge on or off. There is region outside of that ring. Think of it, I like to call it the sphere of influence. I don't know why, I just do. But it is roughly the area that's being selected. There is no hard line on or off. But if I want to select more or less of it, I change the size by grabbing this handle here. And as I drag this down or up, in or out, whatever you want to call it, you see that we get more of the image selected. So there we're getting all of his skin, but we're also getting a whole bunch of the background, which if I didn't want, then I would probably take this down to a smaller area, let's say right about there, and then I'd add multiple control points. And the easiest way to do that is to hold down the Option key and then drag. And now I've got one over there. Let's maybe make this one a little bit bigger because I can. And I pull this one up to his face and pull that down a little bit, make it a little smaller. So now I'm selecting just his skin. And as we saw before, I could use negative control points to block out some of the background and so on and so on. So that's effectively what I would do. Now, let's go back to what I actually want to do to this photo. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. Actually, I think I'll just leave it like that. Let's see, maybe I'll adjust it again later. And I want to, again, make his skin stand out. So let's try structure. I'm gonna take the structure and increase that to begin with. And that's pretty cool because it has really, it's brightened up his skin, the shiny parts of his skin. It's added maybe a little bit of contrast in there. We could probably add, let's try amplifying the whites in a little bit more, make that pop even more in there. We could try adding some contrast, set off against his tattoos a little bit more, a little bit, and get carried away there pretty easily. But that's looking pretty good. Okay, I might want to make the tattoos a little bit darker, but before I do that, I want to take care of the shirt and the hat. So another control point, drop it onto the light part of the shirt, and just drop the brightness down. You don't have to go in and turn on the mask and start moving this around. You know, you can, just like I did here, just drop it on, drag the slider, and you go, yep, that's good. Okay, I'm good with that. Cool. Next. You know, there's nothing that says you have to be super critical about it. You just drag it wherever you want. Let's put another one over here. Maybe that's a bit too much. Pull that down a little bit. And there. So now I've done a nice job of kind of darkening the shirt on there. If I turn these control points off, we can see what that looks like without it. Turn that back on. Cool. Let's do another one on his hat. I want to darken that a little bit as well. Click on it, drop the brightness down. And again, I don't have to go in there and be super meticulous. That's one of the beauties of the control points is they work so well. You can just kind of throw it on there and go to town. And only if you're going, I really need to get a little bit more precise. Okay, what is this doing? What am I looking at? Oh, that's the part of the hat that's being selected. Maybe I really want to get more of it up here. But if you don't need to, don't bother. Just drop it and go. So anyway, so that's on. All right, let's see here. I'm going to bring the brightness up a little bit more in here. I think I am going to add another control point and try to get it on the tattoo. So now is where we get into that. Let's be really precise about it. That's actually a pretty good drop right there, right on his tattoo there. Okay, good. And let's take the brightness of that down. So now I'm kind of really darkening the tattoo, brightening his skin, and I think that's working out pretty well. Pretty well. Let's try it. I want to make it a little bit brighter. Maybe there's too much structure. Maybe that's what my problem here. Let's take some of the structure down just a little bit on there. There we go. Maybe I add a second one of these. There we go. Now we're getting there. I like it. Okay, so now we're really seeing that stand out. We do a compare to the original, and that's a huge, huge difference in there. We're really seeing that spotlight pop out on his chest on there. And then let's add a little bit of vignetting to the end just to kind of knock down some of that background because we don't need that. We just want to focus on him, and away we go. I love it. Okay, let's do one more image. I'm going to save this. I'm going to do one more image, and then I'm going to come back and answer these last couple of questions that are popping up. Let's see here. Where's my Chicago bean? Here it is. The Chicago bean. There you go. So I guess you could kind of call this urban photography, sort of. I don't know. It's just kind of cool. I think the bean is just neat. All right, let's take this into the tool, into Silver Efex Pro. And for this one, I'm going to use the last of the 5 new presets under the street category, and that's high contrast. Pretty easy to see why we want to do that in here. This image is very flat to begin with. Let's add some high contrastness to this. It pops things out. We're seeing some cool texture in here. The sky, it just screams to me like there's so much texture in here that we want to add in. So I'm going to, once again, grab a control point, drop it on the sky, make it nice and big, crank up that structure, pull the brightness down a little bit, and I'm going to move this around to see how it affects the sky differently as I reposition it. And I really probably want to get that right onto one of the clouds on there. There we go. All right, and that looks, I mean, look at that. That's just cool, right? We get that full-on super texture in the clouds in there. A little bit too dark around the edges here, kind of interesting. This is obviously a very wide angle shot. If I look at the metadata on this photo, let's go back to Photolab. This is shot with the 8 to 18 millimeter lens. So that's a 16 to 36 equivalent. That is, and it was just probably shot all the way out. So 16 millimeter wide. Obviously I'm down at the ground, pointing up. We've got this big distortion that's happening as a result of that. And there's a bit of vignetting happening in the lens in here. So I want to get rid of some of that. I want to actually brighten this up a little bit. So let's just drop that control point and brighten up that part of the building just a touch. Good, good, good. And then if I wanted to darken the foreground in here, a great way to do that instead of using control points, in this case, since it's on the bottom edge in here, would be to go into the burn edges, go to the bottom edge, and just like we did with that other photo of the fella on the train, we can take the size, the strength, even the transition of that up and just dial in just a little bit of darkness, a little bit of burning onto the bottom there, and we're good to go. Let's add one more control point right onto the bean. And let's see here. I want to make sure I just get the bean. Oh yeah, perfect. Got the bean, hit the bean. Let's now take that and do I want to brighten a little bit? I don't even know what I want to do in here. A little structure into the bean. Ooh, there we go. That's cool. That makes sense, actually. It's giving us a reflection of the sky that looks more like the sky does now that we've played with it. Dig it. I like that. Kind of cool. If you've never seen the Chicago bean, it's one of those things you think, why? So what? It's a big reflective thing. And then you walk up to it and you're like, oh yeah, that's actually really, really cool. There you go. So there's the bean. Alrighty. That is the end of what I prepared to demonstrate for you guys. I'm going to take a look. There are a couple questions in here, and then we're going to wrap this thing up. Could you explain the color filters in Silver Efex Pro? Okay, so the color filters are all about simulating color filters, physical color filters, glass, red, yellow, green glass that you would put over your camera when shooting black and white film photography. The way that these work is they block that color of light, making that color in the original scene darker. So you put a blue filter on, it blocks blue light, absorbs blue light, and I think I'm doing that right. I might be getting that backwards. I think that's right. Blocks it or blocks that color, and then makes that part of the scene darker, because remember, the image is just black and white. So when you're looking through the camera, you see a blue scene, unless you're shooting digital and you set your camera into black and white and then use physical filters. I actually did a video on that on YouTube a while ago. It's kind of a fun thing to do because you can actually see in real time as you put color filters over the glass. Anyway, it is all about darkening or brightening specific color ranges. And so in software, you have the exact same thing. It's just all digital. And so you go to the blue or the red, and then you adjust the intensity of that, and it makes the blue or the red or the yellow or the orange parts of your image brighter and darker. It's pretty slick. It's pretty cool. What does structure mean on some of your sliders? Okay, structure is another term for that would be micro contrast. It is looking for the fine detail contrast and enhancing the contrast around those edges. So things like brick. A brick wall is a great example of this. Brick wall is all texture, right? If you look at it close, you zoom in close to a photo of a brick wall, and you see a ton of small details of texture. The structure slider is looking for the finest details of the image, the smallest, just few pixel areas where there's high contrast, black versus white, and then increasing that contrast, but only in those fine detail areas, not the whole image overall. So what it ends up bringing out of the image is texture. And so the structure slider could also be thought of as a texture slider, but structure is more technically accurate to what it's doing. Is the kind of thing that if you apply it to a person's face, it will look awful. If you apply it to like a young person's face, it's going to look terrible. It's going to make every pore stand out. It's going to make their face look dirty. You can actually do reverse structure, negative structure, to soften the face. So that's a great tip right there. And it will give the skin a softer, kind of healthy glow to it, if you will. It is more going to be used on places where there's already texture or structure that you want to bring out. So again, that brick wall, in this case, the clouds in the sky are a great example of that. Do you obtain a release from subjects in this genre or in general? Oh, do you obtain a release from subjects in general? Okay. Street photography, you do not need to acquire a model release because they are in public. They have no reasonable expectation of privacy. That's the way that the law is written for model release requirements. Now, you cannot use let me preface this. I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV. Do not take my words as legal advice. Consult with your attorney, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now we got that out of the way. Street photography is fully legit and legal in this country, and different countries have different laws, so watch yourself. Make sure you know what you're doing, where you're going. But in this country, in the United States, I should say, for those who aren't here, Street photography is fully legal. I can go out and take a picture of anybody in the street because they have no reasonable expectation of privacy. They are in the street in public. I cannot take a picture through someone's window of someone in their home because they are in their home. They have a reasonable expectation of privacy. I cannot take a picture over somebody's fence into their backyard because they have a reasonable expectation of privacy, which I have now violated. But for general, someone walking down the street, I take their picture. I have blanket coverage to be able to do that. Now, what I can do with those photos is still limited. I cannot use that type of a photo for commercial photography, meaning let's say I've got some street photo of a guy drinking a can of Coke and I decide to sell that image to Coca-Cola to use as a billboard ad. No go. Can't do that. I would need a model release because that is implying endorsement. And that guy might not like Coca-Cola. Maybe it's just all that was available. And so that's what he was drinking that day, but he doesn't actually like it and he doesn't want to be associated with the brand. So you cannot do anything that implies endorsement of someone, which is entirely what commercial work is. It's implying endorsement. So there's your very general rule on that. But as far as using the photos on my blog, using them in an art installation, hanging them in an art gallery, that's totally fine, totally legit. There have been lawsuits around that, even around street photography in general in New York as recently as the last decade, and it has always gone towards the photographer because it is legal. So there's that. All right, there we go. That's the last question. Thank you again, everybody.